Hello and welcome to Dynamics Update. We have left 2024 behind us and we have stepped into 2025. Gustav, how is your 2025 shaping up right now?
Very nicely. It's the year of the co-pilot agents, right? So I'm revving up now to start learning all about it and enabling it in
Yeah.
all my environments.
Yes, of course, co-pilot all the way. So today is one of the episodes where we actually have a guest, and this is a subject that I've been a bit curious about because I've been ripping my hair out. I don't have that much of it, but I've been working a lot with DualWrite for the last year or so. So I got in touch with this guy, and he's actually the one responsible for DualWrite at Microsoft. So, Sushant, please introduce yourself.
Yeah. Hey, hi Johan, hi Gustav. Happy New Year.
Thank you.
I'm a principal engineer at Microsoft, and I've been working with the DualWrite and the data integration space for probably since the inception of the product. Although our team also works on some other things internally, but for me, I think the key focus is kind of DualWrite and how to kind of upscale the DualWrite and the system overall for the broader community and things like that. So I kind of look at all the technical aspects of it, and to some extent, I also have interactions with external slash internal partners as well to kind of take in their feedback, improve the product, and kind of get in on with the next versions of it. Yeah.
Yeah, that's cool. Because that's one of the things that I often hear when I talk to people about DualWrite. And that's DualWrite is not working correctly. DualWrite
Yeah.
is malfunctioning. DualWrite is not very good.
Right.
And if I talk to customers who haven't implemented DualWrite yet, what they usually ask me is, has it gotten good yet? And
Mm-hmm.
I tend to explain to people that I think that it has to do with understanding the application and the product, because it doesn't work like anything we've used before. It's basically not an integration. It's basically just replicating database lines between two different systems.
Yeah.
And also, the second part is that you need to know the technical parts of F&O and CE, but you also need to know and understand the functional parts, the application logic, the end-to-end processes of each system, in order to understand how DualWrite works. And to be totally honest, there are not very many people in the world that understands all of these things at the same time.
Right, right. That's true in a way, but I think just to bring about a point, like from a technical standpoint, like we know FNO and Dataverse, they kind of have always been slightly different in terms of their platform implementations. But if you look at how their entities are shaped up over the period of years, like I don't know, maybe there are 10,000 more or more entities in FNO and equally so in Dataverse. They have different sets of complexities involved in them. And to know the shape of the entities on both sides and the underlying logic, it's a bit too much for of an ask in that way. So DualWrite, as you rightly said, is a glue that kind of would bind it up together from a transactional point of view. So anything that links up those entities or those maps, that is basically creating that glue to link up the FNO and Dataverse. But at the same point of time, we know that the shape of the entities is different. The logic behind that is different. And as you might know, that the Dataverse entities are pretty much flat in its structure, but they have different complexities in terms of their referential integrity. But on the FNO side, they are pretty normalized tables, and they all come out as a view. So that's where I think the complexity lies, and I think over the period of time, what we have sensed is the partners and the customers, they have slowly gotten into the habit of understanding these differences of shape, and it takes a little getting used to that kind of thought process, like, oh, this is a different shape. The experience or how the platform behaves is slightly different for each of these kind of maps or zones or the line of business application. And that's where that that's where the learning curve of DualWrite comes into picture. It's
And I
learning
also
from
think,
platform. Yeah.
yes, and I also think that one of the important parts is that on the F&O side, we have a lot of structure. We have a lot of rules on how we can do things and what we can do and what we are allowed legally to do. I usually joke that we have auditors and they don't.
Mhm.
So that's a big part in this. And while CRM or CE is more of a support system, it's more of a support for you for your way of working, while
Mhm.
F&O is actually doing a lot of automation tasks in the background that you don't have to do at all.
It's
Mhm.
good that we're an
Right.
F&O podcast, right? Because we don't have anyone's defending CE here, so we should probably do that as well. You might get yelled at, Johan.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, but I mean that's a big point here is that they are behaving very differently, both from a
Yeah.
data structure, but also from how it actually works and what it actually does.
Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
absolutely.
That's right. Yeah.
That's a big thing, and I think I mean from my I've worked with it since CDS. I always see this as, like as you mentioned as well, Sushant, the glue here between F&O, which is basically it's coming from AX or Axapta, and then we have
Mhm.
Dataverse on the other side, which is like built from cloud, and it's scalable in a different way. So I
Yeah.
come at this from two different angles. One, being a developer from start, and now more of a technical architect, I see it as an, and this is interesting to get your opinion, Sushant, because Johan tells me it's not an integration, but I read the documentation and it says that it is an integration, and I see it a little bit as an integration because you actually map two things together.
Yeah.
But of
Yeah.
course, it's not, you're not building it from scratch. You
Yeah.
enable it, you install it, right? But what's your view on that? Do you see it as an integration or do you see it as something else?
So I'll just take a step back. I think from a historical standpoint, like I think the first integration that was tried was the data integrator,
Yeah.
but that was pretty much unidirectional. I think where dual write emerged as an ask was, oh, we have so many different entities and different shape. We need something really real time and bidirectional, and that's where dual write came into existence. And over the period of whatever its existence, what we have noticed is a majority of the traffic is through the live sync. There are multiple modes of dual write, but I think a lot of majority, I would say maybe more than 90% of the traffic is on the live sync. Now, having said that, when you talk about live sync, it becomes a real time integration. Yes, in its real terms, you may say it's a real time integration, but technically, from our side, we know understand it's a more like a transactional integration internally. Yeah, that's how I would term it. Like it's more like
Yeah.
a transactional integration.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I mean, it depends on who you talk to, right? If I go into
Yeah,
a room with developers, I'm probably going to talk about an integration because we're doing
yeah,
mapping and we're doing some conversion. And as you
yeah,
say, it's really it's interface design, right? Because we
yeah,
interface our data model as entities, and then we interface it to the Dataverse entities on the other
yeah.
side. So that's what we're doing, abstracting. But then on the other aspect, like the functional side, we had Rachel here on the podcast before, like the business process catalog that is so great and all the work that's gone into that, which is more
That's.
of a system agnostic thing, really, right? Because then you have
Mhm.
business processes that span over multiple line of businesses, where DualWrite is an enabler for that. It's more of an
Mhm.
abstracted enabler for achieving that business process to work across multiple systems. And then you have to assume that DualWrite just works. It's just a
Yeah,
component, right? So it's
yeah,
you can argue two different stories here. One is the more functional one, and then one is the more technical one. So you won.
right.
I was a little bit right. It's still an
Yeah.
integration, right?
Yeah, yeah. I think you nailed it right. Like I think DualWrite becomes like a platform glue that holds up different line of business applications. So there have been some line of business applications which use more DualWrite little more extensively than others, and they have their own little integration process, the background processes and jobs that kind of leverage DualWrite as the way to integrate the data between the two systems. Yeah.
Yeah,
Mm.
But yeah, you're right. Like it's a part of a bigger piece of puzzle
yeah,
in
of
a way.
course.
Yeah, and
Yeah,
I mean what I also like is that I hadn't heard this until fairly recently. I think it was a year since I heard this the first time, and that's that because I always thought that Dual Write was like the primary integration pattern between Dataverse and FNO, but I actually heard from I think it was your predecessor, that virtual entities is actually the thing that is recommended. And the difference is basically that in virtual entities, we don't move the data between those two different systems and keep it in sync. We only accesses it through like an API, basically.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I think that was another technology that was promoted, and in many cases, I think not replicating data is kind of beneficial in a way, because then you don't probably need to move the data around, run through all the validation logic, because when you move the data, it has to go through all your business logic. The advantage of virtual entity is obviously that, where you don't really have to move the data, and then you can just leverage the entity as is inside of your Dataverse forms or any other places. Yeah, that's one of the other technology aspects. I think there have been talks about the differences about VE and DualWrite. But fundamentally, wherever there is a need for the data to be physically present in either of your instances, that's where dual write comes into picture. But otherwise, in other cases where it is more read only, or more about reading it from one side and not modifying too much, probably we would be the way to go.
Yeah, because as you said, the business logic is one tricky part, and the other tricky part is to actually, I mean, having an engine that moves the data and needs to keep it in sync adds extra complexity as well. If you only need to store it in one place and don't have to keep it in sync, that makes things a lot easier.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, but I think they're always, without getting into specific details, we have so many customers who still use DualWrite. There's obviously a reason and a purpose why they still depend on DualWrite, probably because there is an ask to kind of physically move the data. And I think since we have heard that okay, live sync is there, there's also a need to kind of scale up that live sync, and that's where the async comes into picture, which is what the next new feature about DualWrite is, to help navigate into higher scales and higher volumes of data movement in a near real time rather than a real time mode. Yeah.
Yeah, so maybe elaborate a little bit on the async functionality for those that are listening that are not, because you want, as you mentioned, with the head scratching component, previously there's been some, as you said, with the business logic. So if you activate DualWrite and you start creating a customer or an account in CE, the sync would kick in all of the business validations that occur on the ERP side, right? And that might incur some of the spinning wheel waiting times here that I know was a bit of a hard sell for people, and that's where and of course, and as you say, of course, Sushant, it's hard to scale that up in a volume sense, right? So that's where async comes in.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think that's where this eventual consistency model. I think it's a very well-known system design fact that sometimes having a live sync transaction can become like an anti-pattern in many cases, just because of all these complexities involved, the transactional complexities involved. So many of the higher scaled systems kind of use the eventual consistency model, and that's where async comes into picture. It's a eventual consistency model with a bidirectional sync. So obviously, people try to draw parallels between data integrator and async. Oh, what is the difference between these two? I think the primary difference between these two is the data integrator, although it could move data bidirectionally, but at any point of time, it was never bidirectional. So you could have a map or a task which is one direction only. As regards with async, it can do the same live sync map can just get translated into async. And what it does is it gives you a promise saying, okay, once you commit on one side, it will by default allow you to commit it without taking the business logic latencies on the other side onto a transaction, with the promise that this will get eventually moved. And that's where that eventual consistency model. Because what we observed from a lot of customers, when I think very early on when the async started, the discussion started, it came up from many fragments of customers saying, or they want to scale a million records in, like, let's say a few hours or so. But obviously with the live sync, a lot of things became a bottleneck for them.
Yeah.
And they know that they know that there is a very peculiar pattern of the data. So once they have validated all the things, the eventual consistency model was good enough for many of those scenarios.
Yeah.
So that's where this whole async journey actually started for us.
It's very cool. And I think that's sort of very nice. In all discussions about DualWrite, it's always like, at least for me, it's been ERP and CE, ERP, CE, and all the apps. And that's, of course, I would imagine that's not 90% of the cases. But as a technical architect, I also see the benefit of just pushing data to Dataverse to offload performance-wise. And you can build power apps, and you can do a lot of stuff with data while it's there, because it lights up all of these scenarios. So it's interesting to have that scale back to F&O, because you might have scenarios where you want to do order capture in Dataverse, and for any reason it might be faster for performance. You can scale it better in Dataverse, and then if you don't really care if it has to go by the millisecond into ERP, you can queue it up using the eventual consistency model, right? And it still would go back into ERP. So it gives you more tools in your toolbox if you look at it that way. You don't necessarily have to use CE as a business application. You just need to have Dataverse, which is now it's implied. When you deploy an F&O, you get Dataverse, right? So you already have it.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, that's a very good viewpoint on that.
But is it the majority? I mean, without going into like details and KPIs here, but is it true that the majority of DualWrite customers out there are using? It's for CE and CE apps, right? It's that's where the main volume.
So I think when we look at the telemetry, just running it through it, a lot of data movement happens from FO to DV. A majority of the chunk is from the FNO to DV.
Okay.
But what we have also noticed is most of those or most of those entities that are moved around, those are also part of the bidirectional move. So what happens is, even though there is a majority push from FO to DV, the bidirectional kind of brings in that complexity. Like for the same entities, even CE is kind of ending up updating into FNO. And it might be probably because a lot of the line of business application have to do the constant interaction between the front office and the back office, which kind of makes sense why there is this kind of bidirectional data movement happening.
Yeah, of course. And I mean, what another like topic is that from an F&O side, I mean, now at least with 365 and since a couple of years back, it's been a very clear direction to use standard as much as possible to try to adapt the standard business processes. Of course, you can do extensions, but you try to not go down the old AX path of kind of overlayering and rewriting. So you try to stick to standard as much as possible. But on the CE side, I mean, it's like a feature, right? Because you kind of build your processes around the ease and the flexibility of the platform.
Right.
So doesn't that cause a little bit of it's harder to start with DualWrite from a customized CE solution, because the mapping that you get when you install the DualWrite solution is based on the standard entities, on the accounts and all that, right?
Yeah, that's right. And I think that's also fundamentally why people were asking, like customers were asking for async, is right, because their complexities in C was growing by the bound, just because of these extensions, the plugins, and all sorts of complex business logic. And it makes sense. Like, if you have a platform which allows you to extend, why not use it?
Yeah.
But unfortunately, it does accrue a cost to your live sync. That's where I think this whole model of breaking that synchronization into real time, into a near real time mode, is coming into picture.
Yeah, it makes sense. And again, as you said, it's the promise of consistency. That's what we're saying, right? That when you committed, you get an okay back. The okay is not that it's there; it's that it's going to be there, and we promise that it's going to be there, right?
Yeah.
That's the main
Yeah,
point.
that's right. I think just to bring about a point, you brought a very good point, like the promise of consistency. I think what we also need to understand is it can at sometimes become a black box. Like if you're really thinking of scale, right? When you're talking of millions of records, you're not going to cherry pick or track each and every record as whether it's going or not, right?
No.
So that's why I think along the pipeline we are trying to build in as much robust capabilities. Like if something goes wrong,
Yeah.
we have appropriate audit trail or logging for that, so that that information is getting surfaced to the end user. Now with the async, what we have done is we have tried to leverage as much of Dataverse as possible in terms of its storage. So none of the data that is getting moved around gets outside of the boundaries of your platform. So we just work with references internally, but the actual data, the failures or anything, that still gets logged on the Dataverse side or in FNO side, which kind of gives you the peace of mind in terms of the data residencies or any of those facts in that
Yeah.
point of view.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And this also opens up additional possibilities of at scale retries. Like we understand that there could be sometimes failures, so we have this error handling mechanism where you could at scale retry certain set of segment of records again in async, so that if they fail, yeah, you still have a possibility of retrying the failures and all those kind of things.
Yeah, that makes sense. Because again, it's like the technical hat on here. It's like, yeah, okay.
Yeah,
In the
yeah,
happy flow, it works, but I would still want to be able to figure out because things go wrong, right? You can go
yeah,
down on either
absolutely.
side, so you need to have this kind of telemetry and the
Yeah.
retry capabilities as well. So, but async, this is it in preview or is it live?
Yeah, so I think what in October 24 is when we released it for public preview. It's kind of available to all the customers, not in production because it's preview, so you can on get your hands dirty on sandbox test or dev boxes. And I think the intent for the preview program is to kind of understand the usage of async, understand the telemetry behind the scenes to see how we can keep improving. I think there are few aspects of it is what happens if your systems go down? Like, what is the promise? How can the async guarantee that there is still a promise of eventually it will move, right?
Yeah,
Because we cannot depend that, okay, FNO can go down, your Dataverse can go down intermittently. You can have other type of
of course.
network failure. So I think the plan for the preview program is to gather all this kind of key details, understand those telemetry, and build some guardrails around that,
Hmm.
so that we are able to build a system which is more robust and more scalable. Because I think the promise for async is it has to move more data than the live sync. So for that to happen reliably, we need to understand all these aspects of the data movement to understand. And that's why this preview program was launched, to understand all these details. And I think the customers have been pretty vocal about some of the feedback, like what are the features they want and all that. Yeah, it's a very good feedback that we are getting. So we are in the process of incorporating even some of the feature ask as we go along before.
I I still think it's like an important technology to try to understand, because
Yeah.
I think whether we want or not, it is still a crucial technology to have. If we're using both CE and FO.
Yeah, and I mean as well to enable the Dataverse, but we're not. I mean, we've discussed this many times. There were rumors like FNO will move into Dataverse, right? But that FNO will always have, because of the normalization, as you mentioned, Sushant. As far as I know, at least, FNO will always keep its very heavily normalized database. But then with the use of DualWrite as well as virtual entities, there are a number of technologies now available to get the data into Dataverse and use the whole flexibility there, because you could theoretically you can activate DualWrite, but you don't activate the customer or the global address book maps. You can just enable a map for one table and still leverage the DualWrite async capability, right?
Yeah,
Because it's
that's
just a
right.
tool. Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. I think our first intent, from what we sense, for my async point of view, is it's kind of more geared towards uh, linear relationships rather than those complex mapping relationships. It's not that it cannot work there; it can work there. But I think when we talk about these complex maps, especially like the global address book or things like that, They have a lot of logic which is kind of intertwined for, or you may say specialized for live sync. And when you have such kind of logic which is so specialized, moving into an eventual consistency model might become a little tougher.
Yeah, absolutely.
Although we have seen on different threads and Yammer that they have tried customers and all those accounts with those gap and all, they were able to successfully import all that. But I think there might be some nuances where the live sync logic just is not really a straightforward lift and shift into async. That
No,
might
of
need a
course.
little understanding. But any entities which are more linear relationships, typically the worksheet header line pattern that you might
Yeah,
see in FNO, uh, it can go n level deep, that is fine, but linear relationships will work a lot better because those are the kind of entities which probably would not have all that kind of complex logic where the line status will drive the header status and the other way
yeah,
around also, right? Those kind of complexities which are finely tuned for live sync may be easier to work with, I would say, if
yeah, of
not
course.
if not complex, but at least a little more easier to work with.
Yeah,
And that's where I think even in the preview world, we have seen the usage probably. Most of it has been geared towards those kind of worksheet because those are the kind of entities which are historically been higher volumes
yeah,
and probably also had those inherent issues with live sync where it reached platform limits. Like we know very clearly that live sync can only scale to an extent the platform allows it to.
yeah, of course.
So Dataverse has got its own limitations. FNO has got its own different set of limitations,
Yeah, of
and LiveSync is not an exception to those limitations. So
course.
if it hits those limitations, it will not let you go through. Like
No,
simple
exactly. And there's a
example.
huge amount. There's a huge amount of complexity here as well. I mean, I know
Yeah,
you've had some challenges with pricing. I mean,
yeah,
header and line, just table to table. It's data, right? Table to table mapping. That's the power of data. Like bulk insert, you can go
yeah,
pretty fast, right? But as soon
yeah,
as you want to calculate a discount, that can
yeah,
become a quite complicated thing to do in bulk.
yeah, yeah. That's right. Yeah,
All right.
Yes. I think we're done for today. So I would like to thank you, Sushant, very much for joining us. It was a really, really interesting subject. I think it's fantastically fun to get things to work.
yeah,
I need to know more CE than I do, so I need to learn things every day. So that's good.
But it's also cool to know where we're going, right? I mean, when the async, are there any communicated plans for GA of the functionality, or is that something that you will come out with during 2025, perhaps?
I think GA is around probably in the 2025 zone,
Yep.
probably the first half of 2025. But the specific dates would get announced maybe in a month or so once we have. I think right now we are in the phase of collecting all the data and implementing all those reliability things.
Yep.
So, what we are actively doing as an engineering team is all this information that is kind of getting generated from the preview, it's
Yep.
kind of getting baked into the product. And I'll think we also have a regular sync on the external community Yammer channel to understand if there are more asks around async. Like, I think one of the things that the community can reach out to us and would be really beneficial is what is the delta between live sync and async. Like, technically we know what's the delta, but from a functional point of view,
Yeah.
what would be a way that will ramp you up from a live sync to an async a little
Yeah.
more
Yeah.
easily? That is a key fundamental feedback that we are actively looking and seeking out. And I think based on all this information, that's where we'll come to us more specific dates in the next few weeks, I would say. But yeah, the plan is obviously in this year that this should go into GA.
Cool. Can I make a feature request as well when we discussed? I mean, I know there will be like a. I'm pretty sure there will be a copilot somewhere here as well. But if there will be some kind of agent functionality, a data steward thing, as you mentioned, if
Yeah,
anything goes wrong with the async, I would like to have some kind of, okay, a steward or an agent telling me, "Hello,
yeah,
Gustav. these are the records that went wrong yesterday. I tried to rerun them. Here's what you need to take as an action. That's just a suggestion from my part. If you have a demand from Microsoft to put Copilot somewhere, then maybe that's where you can put it.
Yeah, that's a very good point actually. To be honest, that's a thought process that we are already thinking about.
Yeah.
I think the first step to get there is to kind of summarize all this telemetry information that we have, and once we have it in a order fashion which is kind of consumable. Right now, the data is so huge, so large, it cannot be just exposed as is. So we are working on the first level of fine tuning the data, cleaning up the data, getting it out, and then I think the next layer of it is adding intelligence on that data. But yes, I think there's a lot of thought process being built into it. But I think our first step is to gather all this correct data and information. I think just an extension of that, right? Whatever learnings we do out of this async, even for this troubleshooting, they would probably get translated into even the live sync going forward.
Very cool.
Yeah.
Great, Sushant. So we'll let you get back to work, and thank you so much.
Yeah, this was great. Thank you so much, Gustav. Thank you so much, Johan, for this opportunity.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for listening. Take care.
Take care.
All right.
Bye.